Welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Today we're tackling the American Revolution.
Ooh, a big one.
Yeah, but we're going deeper than just battles and dates.
Right. Getting into the why, the how, the stuff textbooks gloss over.
Exactly. And our main source, the American Yawp. This collaborative history project, always evolving, kind of like our understanding of the past itself, right?
Exactly. And it shows just how complex those pre-revolution days were.
Like most colonists in the early 1700s, they considered themselves British.
Oh, yeah, deeply so. Proud to be part of the empire, winning wars for Britain, loved British goods, British liberties, the whole deal.
They ended up rebelling. What happened?
Well, see, there were these subtle cracks beneath the surface. One big one, salutary neglect.
Salutary.
Yeah. Britain was kind of busy with other stuff, so they took a hands-off approach to the colonies.
So basically, you do you colonies, just send us the good stuff.
Pretty much. Unintentionally, this gave the colonies a taste of self-governance. They got used to running their own affairs.
Ah, so when Britain tried to tighten the reins later.
Exactly, it didn't go over well. This hands-off period turns out to be crucial.
Makes sense. But wasn't it just practical stuff? Weren't there big ideas brewing too?
Oh, absolutely. You've got the Enlightenment spreading those ideas of reason, individual liberty.
Question everything. Think for yourself, that vibe.
Yeah, but at the same time, you've got the Great Awakening. Intense religious revival, emphasizing personal faith, emotion.
So reason and passionate belief, both shaping the colonists' worldview.
And both, in their own ways, fostering a sense of independence, that right to challenge authority.
Fascinating mix. Okay, so we've got colonists used to doing their own thing, influenced by these powerful ideas.
Yeah.
What sets things off?
Well, you can't talk about the American Revolution without talking about taxes.
Of course. It's always about taxes.
Right. After the 7 Years' War, which some might know as the French and Indian War, Britain's in debt. Big time.
Wars are expensive.
And they looked to the colonies, figuring, hey, you guys benefited, time to chip in.
But the colonies weren't exactly thrilled to be treated like a piggy bank.
Nope. This is where that clash of perspectives gets really interesting. Britain. We're an empire, you're part of it, we make the rules.
And the colonies, hold on, we've been doing things our way for a while now.
Exactly. And they felt being taxed by Parliament, where they had no elected representatives, violated their rights.
No taxation without representation, the classic line.
Right. It wasn't just the money. It was who had the power to take that money. A power struggle, right?
And this all starts to boil over with a series of acts passed by Parliament.
Yeah, things start escalating. You've got the Proclamation Line in 1763, restricting westward expansion.
Colonists fought in the war, helped win, and then can't settle the land. Ouch.
Then the Sugar and Currency Acts, regulating trade and currency, but colonists saw it as benefiting British merchants unfairly.
So it's not just taxes, it's that sense of, hey, the system's rigged against us.
And lots of colonists stayed loyal to Britain. But for a growing number, it felt like an attack on their liberties, their prosperity.
Okay, simmering resentment, feeling like Britain's overstepping. What's the tipping point?
Many point to the Stamp Act of 1765. Things really escalate here.
The Stamp Act. What was that specifically?
First, direct internal tax on the colonies. It affected everyone, not just merchants or specific goods.
Well, always being taxed.
Printed materials, legal documents, newspapers, pamphlets, even playing cards.
So can't do business, spread news, or even play a card game without paying this tax.
And colonists responded with a fury even they probably didn't anticipate.
What did that resistance look like?
Multi-layered. You've got colonial elites, the educated, influential men.
So they're writing fiery resolves, petitions, arguing the Stamp Act's unconstitutional.
Right. But it wasn't just in the halls of power. Merchants, hit hard by the tax, organized boycotts of British goods.
Bold move, putting their livelihoods on the line.
And it worked. Those boycotts hurt the British economy, forced Parliament to take notice.
The power of collective action.
Then you've got everyday people taking it to the streets. Groups like the Sons of Liberty, organizing protests, intimidating tax collectors.
So elite arguments, A&D, popular protests, all aimed at this one act.
It wasn't just about the money, it was the principle. Colonists saw it as a violation of their rights as Englishmen. A slippery slope to tyranny.
A line in the sand. This far, no further.
And all that resistance, from elites to everyday folks, it worked. Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in 1766.
Victory for the colonists. But Something tells me this isn't the end.
Oh, not at all. Repealing the Stamp Act was a temporary fix. The core issue, who had the right to tax and govern, remained a huge problem.
And that's where things really start to get messy.
Yeah.
We'll have to save that for part 2.
Yeah.
Okay, so Stamp Act repealed. A win, but as you said, not the end of the story. Did Britain just give up on taxing the colonies?
Oh, they tried. They still needed that revenue, still wanted control. So, different tactic. Instead of direct taxes, they go for external taxes on imports.
Sneaky. Figure the colonists wouldn't notice.
Maybe thought it'd be less objectionable. Taxes on trade, that was normal. But for many colonists, it wasn't the type of tax, it was the principle.
So that taxation without representation issue.
Exactly. And their response, fascinating. They keep using what worked before. Boycotts, protests, tons of pamphlets, letters, all arguing against these new taxes.
So hitting them in the wallets and the court of public opinion. What were these new taxes called?
The Townshend Acts. Named after Charles Townshend, the guy who came up with the idea, taxes on tea, glass, lead, paint, all imported from Britain.
Of course. So how'd that go over?
Predictably badly. Colonists saw it as another attempt to control them, raise revenue without their consent. Boycotts exploded, and colonial women. Huge role in this.
Oh, this is something I wanted to touch on. Women in the Revolution, they often get overlooked.
Absolutely crucial. They made those boycotts effective. Organized spinning bees, making their own cloth instead of buying British fabric.
So it's not just we won't buy, it's we'll make our own.
Right. Using their domestic skills, their purchasing power as protest. They're writing letters, articles, even giving speeches, arguing for colonial rights.
Shaping public opinion, and challenging gender roles.
Powerful. It shows that the revolution wasn't just battles and politicians. It was a movement engaging everyone. Men, women, elites, ordinary folks, all resisting.
Okay, back to the Townshend Acts. Did Britain cave again?
Mostly, yeah. They repealed most of them, but they kept the tax on tea. Symbolic. Asserting that right to tax.
Saving face, holding on to a sliver of power. But I bet the colonists weren't fooled.
Nope, they saw right through it. And that stubbornness about tea comes back to bite them big time with the Boston Tea Party.
Ah, yes. Heard about that. Weren't there some costumes involved?
Some very dramatic costumes.
Yeah.
But before we get to guys dressed as Mohawks tossing tea in the harbor, we got to understand the context. The Tea Act of 1773, it wasn't really about the tea.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. If not the tea, what was it about?
Control. Who had the power in the colonies? See, the Tea Act actually lowered the price of tea.
Wait, cheaper tea? That doesn't sound so tyrannical.
It gave the British East India Company a monopoly. Cut out colonial merchants.
Ah, there it is. Control the economy, undercut local businesses.
Colonists saw right through it. Sneaky way to make them accept that taxation without representation, even if the tea was a good deal.
So, time for a statement. A very splashy one.
December 16th, 1773. Colonists, some dressed as Mohawks, boarded those ships in Boston Harbor. 342 chests of tea overboard.
I bet that got Britain's attention.
Fury. They saw it as open rebellion, responded with the coercive acts, or as the colonists called them, the intolerable acts.
Intolerable, yikes. What did they do?
Punish Boston, make an example. Close the port till the tea was paid for, restricted town meetings, and trials for British officials accused of crimes. Those happened back in England.
Isolate and punish, hoping to scare the other colonies straight. Did it work?
Opposite effect. Instead of isolating Boston, the intolerable acts created outrage, solidarity. Other colonies saw it as a threat to their liberties.
Divide and conquer. Backfired spectacularly.
Big time. And this is when things shift. It's not just protests, boycotts here and there. It's becoming a unified resistance. 1774, the First Continental Congress meets.
This is where it gets serious.
Ah.
What was on their agenda?
Big questions. How to respond to the intolerable acts, assert colonial rights, reconciliation, or something more drastic.
And what they decide?
Not ready for full-on independence yet, still hoping for peace. But do tea. They agreed on some stuff. Continued boycotts, and colonies should start training militias.
Militias. Now we're talking armed conflict.
It's getting real. But the biggest thing, they drafted a Declaration of Rights and Grievances, listed their complaints, asserted their rights as British subjects.
Laying it all out, saying, this is what we believe, this is what we'll fight for.
Exactly. And it shows how they're using those Enlightenment ideas. Natural rights, consent of the governed, the right to resist tyranny.
Not just theories anymore, it's the foundation for a revolution.
As these ideas spread, more colonists see themselves as Americans, not just British subjects. The stage is set for a confrontation that'll change everything.
Right, back for the final stretch. Last time things were super tense. First Continental Congress, militias popping up, that declaration of rights and grievances. Colonists weren't playing around. So how do we go from all that to actual fighting?
Well, it all starts with those iconic shots. The shot heard around the world. Lexington and Concord, April 1775. British troops head out from Boston aiming to snag colonial military supplies.
Lexington and Concord, yeah. Every American school kid learns those names. But what's interesting is neither side actually wanted a fight at that point, right?
It's true. Tensions were high GH, but most colonists still hoped things could be worked out with Britain. Continental Congress was even drafting a new petition to King George, trying for a peaceful solution.
So two sides facing off, nobody really wanting to pull the trigger. What happened? Who shot first?
Honestly, we might never know for sure. Accounts vary. But we do know a skirmish broke out, 8 colonists died, and the British marched on to Concord, where the resistance got even fiercer.
So whether it was intentional or a tragic accident, those first shots changed everything. No turning back.
Exactly. News spreads fast. Colonists everywhere rush to join the fight. Siege of Boston begins, and the Continental Congress. They realize they need a real army, so they form the Continental Army.
Led by George Washington, of course.
The obvious choice, Virginia planter, military experience from the French and Indian War, a respected figure who could unite those very different colonies.
But let's be real, the Continental Army was up against the biggest empire in the world. Outnumbered, outgunned. How'd they stand a chance?
It's the classic underdog story. Part of it was, well, America's huge E. The British were used to European warfare, tight battlefields.
But here, it's forests, swamps, mountains. The colonists knew the terrain, the British didn't.
Guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run tactics, completely threw the British off their game. And then there's the foreign alliances. Early on, it was mostly the colonists against the mighty British Empire.
But then, France steps in.
Oh yeah, France wanting to weaken their old rival. They joined the American side. Big time.
Must have been a huge morale boost for the colonists and a real pain for Britain.
Money, supplies, troops. French support was essential. But even so, the war dragged on. Years of brutal fighting, hardship on both sides.
And we can't forget, this wasn't some clean, glorious fight for freedom. It was messy, bloody, lots of suffering involved.
Absolutely. Soldiers on both sides facing disease, starvation, brutal winters, civilians caught in the crossfire, homes destroyed. And for enslaved people, the war offered opportunities, but also really tough choices.
Right. The British offered freedom to enslaved people who joined them. Suddenly, it's not just about independence, it's about who gets freedom and what that freedom even means.
It complicates the whole narrative, doesn't it? The revolution. It had contradictions, unintended consequences. But in the midst of all that, a powerful idea takes root. One that secures independence and inspires people for centuries to come.
You're talking about the Declaration of Independence, right? That document laying out the case for a new nation based on liberty, equality. But how did we get there? From fighting for rights within the empire to wanting to break away completely?
Well, there's this pamphlet that becomes a huge E. Thomas Paine's Common Sense.
Oh, yeah. Common Sense. I remember reading bits of it in school. Pretty radical stuff.
It was. Published in 1776, and Paine just lays it out plain and simple. It's common sense for the colonies to break free. Monarchy, that's a system that violates people's rights, he argues.
So it's not just, let's fix this relationship with the king. It's, let's build something new, a government based on what we, the people, want.
And that message hit hard with colonists who were already fed up with Britain. Common sense makes independence seem achievable, not just some radical idea.
It primes everyone for what's coming next.
Exactly. Just a few months later, the Continental Congress makes it official. The 13 colonies, free and independent states.
July 4th, 1776. The date etched in every American's mind. But declaring independence is one thing, winning it is another. How'd they actually pull it off? Defeat the mightiest empire in the world.
It was a long, tough road. The Continental Army, led by Washington, had to adapt constantly. Shortages, low morale sometimes, never enough money.
Sounds like they were figuring it out as they went along.
A lot of improvisation. But they had advantages too. Knowing the land, believing in their cause, and that support from France, it can't be overstated.
And those everyday folks who became soldiers, farmers, shopkeepers, they put everything on the line for this idea of freedom.
The revolution wasn't just about generals and politicians. It was a true grassroots effort. And after years of fighting, setbacks, the tide turns, British start taking heavy losses, support back home dwindles, they realize this war can't be won.
So what was the final straw? How did it actually end?
Yorktown, Virginia, 1781, General Cornwallis, leading the British, gets tracked by the Americans and the French. Weeks-long siege and Cornwallis surrenders. Essentially the end of major fighting in the war.
So Yorktown leads to peace talks, and finally, America's independence is recognized. What a moment.
It changed the world, really. Those colonies, British possessions just a while ago, now they're a new nation, a republic built on those ideals of self-government, individual liberty.
So, happy ending. Colonists win, freedom for everyone, the end.
Oh, if only it were that simple. Winning independence was just the beginning, the new United States. They had to build a government, figure out their economy, deal with all those divisions the war exposed. It's a whole other story.
Wow, what a journey this has been. From those early complaints to full-blown war to the birth of a nation. It's incredible to see how those colonists, fired up by big ideas and everyday grievances, took on the most powerful empire and won.
And their fight, their victory, it became the symbol of hope for anyone yearning for freedom all over the world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the American Revolution. We hope it's made you curious to learn even more. Until next time.